going to take your lead. Like when we go off track, you bring us back.
All right. That's a terrible game plan. Somebody else should be the leader here. All right. How's it going, guys? I'm talking today to a couple of, wolf experts, I would say, wildlife experts. Jeff Reed, Dr. Jeff Reed, PhD, is a computational linguist. He's had 30 years in the tech sector, and he's a researcher near Yellowstone using AI and bioacoustics to study wolf communication in the Cry Wolf Project. Casey Anderson is a wildlife naturalist and filmmaker known for his TV series Expedition Wild and America the Wild on Nat Geo Wild. He's also the founder of the Montana Grizzly Encounter rescue and educational sanctuary, where he really rehabilitates grizzlies and educates the public about wildlife conservation. You can see his new YouTube series, Endless Venture, coming to your computer soon. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for having us.
Quite a mouthful trying to sum up what you guys are about.
Most important, you forgot we're both born and raised in Montana, and we like to be feral more than fancy.
Yeah, we're just Montana kids that love to run around in the wild. That's right.
Couple of natives. Jeff, you have a TED Talk coming up soon. Would you like to rehearse it here for us?
No, they don't allow you to, right? They're very strict, right? They want the cool content for the public. But we can hint at some things for sure.
Fair enough. I assume it's about the Cry Wolf Project. Your research has amassed the largest data set of wild wolf communication in the world, revealing over 20 different vocalizations that wolves use to communicate. Is that right?
Yeah, it's very massive. And it's not just of wolves, it's recordings of all animals, but we're really focused on wolves and elk.
Okay. And what is the end goal for the study with all this research?
To waste a bunch of government money. No, actually, not at all. There's some cool things about it. Like, one of the coolest is that Yellowstone's a very rugged place, right? The greater Yellowstone, both inside and outside the park. And a lot of this technology with AI, here's a example piece of technology that has 4 cameras, thermal cameras, long battery life, AI inside. What you're trying to do is put these devices out. They have long battery, they live in the rugged, and they're capturing sound and video, but they're only capturing the sound and video you're interested in, right? Because if you had to capture all the audio for 24/7 through 365 days a year, you'd have to go listen to all of it, right? Well, that doesn't do you really any good other than not having to sit out there the whole time. And what the AI does is it lets us find the sounds we're interested in. And so in some cases, that's wolves, which is just a fascinating topic in and of itself. It's one of the most iconic sounds of the wild. But you can also detect gunshots, and you can detect the location of a gunshot and the caliber of the gunshot and the wind, and maybe law enforcement wants that. And this technology is evolving fast enough that, of course, the military is interested in it, border security, all sorts of things. And if you can build it to last in a place like Yellowstone, it can work in a lot of places. So there's a lot of value that comes out of Yellowstone research that benefits the general public.
It looks like the camera they have inside the pylon cam for football games. I take it you didn't just order this on Amazon, though.
No. We built this, a little company of mine called GrizzCam. And in fact, there's a Tesla battery cell in here, of all things. Elon has innovated something interesting. But yeah, think of it as the iPhone of camera traps. We're trying to actually bring back to America technology that does something useful. And like, as Casey knows, there's no more difficult animal to study than wolves. So if you can do it with wolves in rugged landscapes, it's valuable for a lot of use cases.
Gotcha. And Casey, let's talk about some other animals that you have experience with. You're a bear guy. You have quite a bit of experience with Brutus the bear. You want to talk about Brutus a little bit and how you went on to found the Montana Grizzly Encounter?
Yeah, Brutus was a bear I rescued when he was about, 4 months old, size of a thermos. And a bear that I raised simultaneously while I was being a filmmaker. So there was a period of time that I was going out filming wild grizzly bears and then coming home to a bear and then going back out. And, in the thread of what we're talking about, I learned so much from that relationship, being close to a grizzly bear who lived to be 19 before he passed away. And a lot of it was these subtle little things that you was never would be able to learn unless you had that exposure. And some of them were sounds. There's things when I would go out in the wild and encounter a wild bear, bears would say something very clear to me in an audible way. And because I had that exposure to Brutus and had the ability to see what the cause and effect of those sounds were, it actually helped me navigate the wild space and wild grizzly bears a lot more in a safe way and an understanding way. And I think, just to loop that into that, Brutus and the audio scenarios that we're talking about here, it is this lost language that I think people were once really keyed into. And thanks to AI and thanks to the technology that Jeff's developing, we are kind of cracking the code again and being able to be part of that natural conversation like we never have before because of technology. And I think it not only worked with my relationship with Brutus, but it works every time I encounter a wild grizzly bear, every time I encounter anything out there in the wild now. It is like a cheat code. You can really feel and see and hear things out there on the landscape like never before if you take the time to listen. And through this technology, we are hearing and understanding and translating a language that's new to us now. And I think it's awesome.
That is really great. And tell me, my family loves going to the Montana Grizzly Encounter. It's an awesome place. But for anybody who has not visited it, tell me what it is and why you built it.
Yeah, Montana Grizzly Encounter, we founded it in 2002, so it's been around for a while now. And the idea was I was encountering all sorts of these bears that were kind of in these dead end streets. They weren't able to go back into the wild for various reasons, whether they're orphaned or they were born in captivity. And there were all these animals that needed a place to go. And what a better place to be, right? People always say, why did you put it on I-90 right on the way to Yellowstone? Well, that's exactly why we did it. We wanted people who are traveling to or living in Yellowstone country who live with these animals to be able to stop by, see these animals, get to learn to love them and understand them for who they really are. And then in turn, through all that knowledge, be able to actually coexist with them. And I think that's the main thing. It's saving the lives of the bears, but more importantly, educating the public so we can live with these animals on the landscape.
Casey, what's the coolest sound Brutus made, like in close quarters? Because I've listened to a lot of wolves, right, in the wild with these recorders, and there's some cool sounds they make that you would never hear, right? You hear the howl from up to 5 miles away sometimes, but you're not going to hear those close range sounds that they're making all the time. In fact, wolves roughly vocalize half as much as a typical American speaks in a given day. That's how much sound they're making. But what was some of the cool ones that you learned from Brutus that you took out in the wild?
Well, there's two that are rarely heard for obvious reasons. I'll explain. One is this, what we call puttering or nooking, or it kind of sounds like a car trying to start, this little sound. And it's actually a pacification sound that cubs do when they're nursing. And it's like a purr. It's a contentment.
Okay.
And even adult bears will do it. And if they're doing that, it's a sign of them being very relaxed. They're usually cuddling up to another animal that they have some sort of feelings for in a positive way. So that's one interesting one you can only hear if you're very, very close to a bear. The second one, which you don't want to hear, is this really almost subsonic deep moan. It reminds me very much of what an elephant emits. It's just like, it's almost a vibrational thing more than a sound. It's just this deep, guttural, slow moan. And they do that when they're very agitated and about to make a decision to do something about it. If you're close enough to hear it, that's where you start pulling your bear spray out. You probably want to have your bear spray out before then, because that bear is likely going to be coming your direction in a real quick way.
Are they intending for you to hear that sound, or is that just for them?
I think it's for, we're only one species that they're encountering and being agitated with on the landscape. I think it's for the whole gamut. We just aren't in tune to it as much as probably other animals. I'm sure wolves, when they hear this, they know it's time to tuck their tails and go the other direction.
Yeah, we get a lot of wolves on grizzlies, and wolves do the same thing. Dogs do the same thing. If you hear if your dog has a bone and you walk up to it and you try to grab that bone and you hear that very low growl, they are letting you know that it's trouble time. And other dogs know that. They can tell that that's a difficult situation. I'm sure that grizzly bears do that a lot with each other. And so it's a grizzly to grizzly communication that other listeners can pick up on and figure out that, okay, there's some intention coming here.
I think that's spot on.
So you guys are going out together into wolf territory to take the stick where you've stacked all the GoPros, and you're planting those where the wolves feed and live and make their vocalizations, correct?
Yeah, we call it Grizz Cam, but yeah, it's just an iPhone camera trap, right? And so like if you've ever used a camera trap or a game trail camera, you go put it on a trail or wherever you want. But these also record sound, and sound's very important for evolution because it travels around things, right? Light doesn't travel around a tree. So communication could have all been gestural, right? We could be using sign language right now, but sound has the advantage of traveling around objects. And so almost every species uses sound to communicate in some way. So it's not, if you're lucky enough to get a cougar walking by a game trail camera, you'll pick it up, maybe at 30, 40 yards max. But sound, we get caterwauls from cougars, 2 miles away. So now you can start like going, what's going on the landscape without having to put 1,000 camera traps out. So there's a little bit of thinking and science and logic behind how you lay these out on the landscape. But yeah, that's the gist of it. You go put them out and you're recording sound and video.
Is your goal to avoid interacting with the wildlife, or are there instances where you kind of come face to face with them?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a non-invasive device, right? You're not going to be able to go sit 20 yards from a wolf den site without doing some disruption. I mean, Meach, who studied wolves in Ellesmere, where they're hardly impacted by humans, could get a lot closer. But wolves in Yellowstone and the greater Yellowstone stay away from people, right? And so by putting these devices out, you can learn things about them. And not just them, you can learn things about people. Like I catch, illegal shed hunters on my private property all the time walking by. So it is a monitoring device for whatever purpose you want, and you think through how you want to put it out there.
And are you, like, Casey, are you making a documentary while you're doing this? Is this part of your Endless Venture series as well? Are you incorporating it?
Yeah. And in fact, one of the ways that we're incorporating it, it's pretty interesting, is from experience I had in Nepal. I went there for an Endless Venture episode to track tigers. And once I was there, was just hit in the face with the statistic of 63 people have been killed by tigers in the last 3 years in this very specific spot that I've been going to track tigers.
Oh, wow. And you went there.
And I went there and I was walking around in the jungle with these tigers. But it's the front lines of human wildlife conflict like I've never seen before. And, some conversations I had with Jeff and learning, it was a very cool thing because I was learning how to track the tigers in a very primitive way from the local people. And you don't track tigers by following tracks through the jungle, but you track tigers by listening to the jungle. And if you can imagine the jungle as an orchestra of all these instruments playing simultaneously, right? There's just birds and monkeys and deer. They're always making sound, and it's huge. If you can teach yourself to listen for a very specific note coming out of a very specific instrument, those notes are saying tiger. So it's honing that in. And so we would sit there in the jungle, we'd close our eyes and we would just listen. And then you'd hear in the distance this alarm call of a deer going tiger. And then you hear the monkey go tiger. And now you can just, with your eyes closed, hear where that tiger is moving through the jungle. And so talking to Jeff about this, it's like, okay, let's take the technology, the AI aspect of this, so we don't have to guess. It literally will figure out, yeah, that's a tiger sound from a chital deer. That's a monkey saying tiger very specifically, and it can take the waveform and actually decipher the difference in sound between a monkey looking at a tiger and a monkey looking at a leopard through the AI. So now you've taken this old school language that we used to know, married it with AI, and you're honing it in to actually pinpoint exactly where that tiger is moving through the forest. And one thing with this technology is really cool, is you put them out there and they can triangulate, and it's with an insane amount of accuracy where that sound is coming from. So now you can say, and this is what we've done, is we've basically created a system that we can put on the landscape that can let the wild animals tell us where tigers are at any given time. And then we now have an interface where people can go, okay, there's a lot of hot spots in section B3 where tigers calls have been coming all day long. Maybe we shouldn't go there today. And that in turn it's not going to save everybody's life, but it's going to give people the knowledge in the wild that's going to let them make decisions that could potentially mitigate any kind of conflict.
It's like Waze for your car. You say,
Yeah.
don't go to this is a bad area today. This you want to avoid this spot. All right, let's do a little exercise, and I want to play a recording that you sent me, guys, of a one-eyed wolf, and you tell me what we're hearing the one-eyed wolf say.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna play it into my microphone so that you can hear it. All right, so sort of 4 distinct sounds, right? There. What did we just hear?
Let's tap into your inner animal first. Just instinctually, Joe, what do you think you hear?
To me, it sounds sad, a little bit, like a bit of a plaintive wail. I don't know why that occurred to me, but that would be my first thought.
Yeah, good. So that was a very famous wolf called 907. She died natural death this year. She was 11 years old when she made that howl. She has the record for most litters in Yellowstone National Park, and she had one eye. One of her eyes was damaged. The typical wolf in Yellowstone National Park lives 3.5 years. Outside the park, they live a lot less because humans can hunt them. She made that howl. You would have never heard all of those sounds without an acoustic recorder. So there are 3 howls. After the first howl, you heard something like shale or rocks moving.
Yeah.
And she was right next to the recorder. Now, what had happened an hour earlier is a herd of elk had come running by that recorder, and you could hear the elk making their sounds, and you could hear wolves chasing them. She stopped, and the rest of the pack chased those elk up onto a mountainside, and she stayed behind. And she was howling to them. And I like to think of a howl as basically, here I am, right? With the assumption, where are you? And she was locating them. And you couldn't hear it in there because it was distance, but there were some faint howls off in the distance of them calling back. Now, what's interesting, most of the time when you play a wolf howl, you'll get people say that's mournful, right? It's sad. And we quickly shift to music. We start thinking in terms of music. But as a linguist, you learn that music takes place in one part of your brain and language takes place in another. And our interpretation of the sound of that wolf may have nothing to do with the wolf's language. It's like you going and learning Spanish and hearing something that sounds like something you know, and then the people are like, yeah, no, you just swore at my grandmother by saying that, right? And so without getting into the details, I think she was she was the alpha female. I think those flat howls, you've also heard howls where the pitch rises, like, whoo. That's a very flat howl. And I'm starting to see that more and more from dominant wolves in the pack. And so I think I'm a dominant wolf. I'm reaching out and trying to contact my pack mates. And that's really what she was saying.
Very quickly, what about the chorus of wolf howls when they're all going together? I mean, clearly they're not saying we are here, right? What is that about?
Kind of. A chorus is when a pack of wolves communicate as a group, right? And often they do it to signal that this is their territory. But there's not a chorus howl is a bad name. It's really just a chorus because it's not just howls that take place in the chorus. There are other sounds like we call them woas and yip yaps. And each wolf makes slightly different sounds. Some of them make the same sounds. It's like a political rally. Someone might be chanting one word and another's chanting another, but collectively you hear this whole political rally, and people are defining their territory, and that's what wolves are doing. And they're not doing it to tell humans, this is our territory. They're doing that to tell other wolf packs that this is their territory, because the number one cause of death of a wolf in a wild setting is other wolves. In a human-dominated setting, it's humans. So that's what they're doing, and they make this really weird sound called a woa, and we think it's to strengthen family bonds. Mostly females do it, and it's kind of a wolf's version of I love you, and it's this really strange sound. But what you hear in your ears is chaos, and it lasts about 60 to 90 seconds. But there's sound going on there. Like Casey was saying, you could think of it as an orchestra, and there's different players in that. And we're starting to learn that the dominant females are the ones who kind of instigate that chorus howl, like to build pack structure. Wolves are very social animals, and they protect their packs. And so there's a lot more going on in that chorus than just a howl.
I've got a lot to learn, clearly. You guys are spending all this time talking directly to the animals. You're talking to bears and elk and wolves. What are they telling you about how we're doing as humans in terms of managing them?
It's an interesting thought. There's very few places that you can go anymore and actually find no sound, right? Or animal sounds that's the only thing that you can hear. But there are those places that do exist in Montana still. But they are definitely at threat. And I think that sometimes when you're listening, and Jeff can jump in here, but when you're listening with these devices and you don't hear a human sound, and you're able to find a place on the landscape where animals are communicating as animals always do, it's a rare event. And I think, what we're hearing is that those events of just the wild speaking wild are starting to fade away.
Yeah. And they're getting louder. Like birds in cities have to sing louder. Like we've studied that for a while now. So they're adapting to the landscape as well. There's no place you can go that you're not going to hear an airplane. So you will always hear some sort of anthropogenic noise. But, here's your public service announcement. Like, why do we do this? I was researching this one really good hunter I respect who tries to figure out how elk bugle. And there were a couple archers over in the Big Sky area who killed a grizzly bear, and they were out there hunting with bows, right, and bugling. And I was researching this guy online, and he was trying to imitate cow elk really well. And I was noticing that he was getting it a little too high of a pitch. And when you get higher pitches, you're basically imitating younger animals. Just like you hear a baby cry, it's a higher pitch, and you go running. Well, elk will do that with young calves. The calves will make a higher pitched sound, but other things will come running too if you get that imitation wrong. And that other thing is a grizzly bear. So if you're going to be a good imitator of animals for hunting, don't be a stupid imitator of animals, right? Learn something about the science. So that's an example. That's more of a practical example. And
I gotta jump in real quick because it's so true. It's so true. I mean, as an archery elk hunter, and you go out in the woods, especially if you're going to go hunt in grizzly bear country, if you talk to the average hunter and say, "Hey, would you take peanut butter and smear it all over yourself and walk out in the grizzly bear country?" and they'd go, "No way, that's stupid, man." Then learn how to cow call, because you're going out there and you're imitating an injured calf elk. And then you use the excuse that you shot that bear in self-defense. It's as stupid to do that as it is to smear peanut butter all over your body. So I think it is. It's learn what you're doing out there before you go out there.
You're like the ice cream truck song.
You are. Exactly.
And don't turn it into some political thing like we need to manage grizzly bears more and kill all of them and kill wolves. Okay, yes, every state should manage their wildlife based on the complexity of that state's population and how it perceives things. But where we live here, around the greater Yellowstone, Park County is a $500 million tourism economy, and that's driven by Yellowstone National Park. $500 million annually. And agriculture, which I'm part of, is only a $40 million industry. So, I don't care what they do with Malta with wolves, but you come down in this area, remember, we make a living on these animals. So, all I'm saying, and like Casey's saying, is just be smart when you go hunt. And more importantly, isn't it more fun to be good at something than bad at it? And so you can learn a lot just by pulling in a little bit of knowledge.
That's great. I want you guys to give me a fun wolf story, either something that you've learned from them by eavesdropping on them, or some kind of interaction that you've had.
Man, I've learned so much from watching wolves, and in fact, just a lot of people would be surprised. Some of the best things I've learned about hunting by watching the experts, man. And I'll tell you who the experts are. It's a pack of wolves. And one cool thing is landscape knowledge. You watch a pack of wolves and you see the elk herd in the distance. You're like, okay, point A to point B. But then you see them all stop down, and they have this awareness of the landscape and the way that the winds move and how the thermals change. And they might go backwards 2 miles to catch a ridge and then loop around, knowing that the thermals are going to change, and then they're going to bump into the elk are going to bump up right into them. And so, again, one thing that's amazing, and I think the more that I watch wolves on the landscape, the one thing that is really apparent is how little we know. And every day they're such a complex animal. And I think, with all canines, we have an ability to relate to them quite a bit. And I think that's where the love and hate comes from. But I think by watching them on the landscape and move in such grace is a lesson that we should all learn. And honor them for what they are as an amazing hunter. And as hunters, believe it or not, we can learn something from wolves.
That's cool. Totally. I mean, and they use sound in their hunting as well. Not as much as, their physical in their eyes to hunt, but I've seen them corner elk on cliffs and chase them off the cliff and then come back around after the elk jumped off 80 feet and died. And you think, okay, well, humans were doing this 10,000 years ago in this area. They're out watching wolves and they're like, maybe that's a way we chase bison off a cliff and communally hunt. So there's all sorts of lessons you can learn from them. One thing they do is they lie, they deceive. I've seen them use howls near their den site to distract another wolf pack or humans away from the den site. So they'll howl, get your attention, then they'll move farther away, howl again, and keep, they're lying like we do, like they're deceiving. I've seen them do it on elk where a dominant wolf, an elk will see the dominant wolf, not see the other wolves, and they'll bed down, and this dominant wolf will kind of push this elk in their direction, then back off and lay down. And I swear they're giving some sort of signal, maybe auditory, because I've heard them make really small moans and howls. And then those other wolves get up and then they just go in on that elk. So there's lots of things they're doing, but we're not part of their pack that we don't get to hear. But it is fun to watch them observe and how to take some of those skills, if you're a hunter yourself.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so cool. And Casey, you mentioned canines, our relationship with dogs. I want to ask you guys this. Have you seen the videos of the dogs hitting buttons to make sentences?
Yeah, I know the CEO really well, Leo Trotti.
Do we buy that? Are they really they're really making sentences?
The coolest one. So, okay, now we're getting fun. We won't go down who Chomsky is, but wolves make a particular call called a bark howl, right? And Casey and I and anybody else who's been around wolves a lot, they know this, right? And they're combining a bark with a howl into a sentence-like structure, right? Dogs do not do this. I've only found a few dogs breeds that do this. combine a bark with a howl. And the bark's essentially alarm. It's like stranger danger. And then this modulated howl is send backup. It's like trying to tell your pack mates, I need some help. Like there's trouble here. And you'll see it when wolves are attacked by another pack or those sorts of things. Well, dogs don't do that at all because, one, they're not as, I think, smart as wolves in many cases, but also because we selected dogs to just bark, right? Bark at the mailman, bark at whomever, at a bird, just bark all the time because we don't want to get eaten, right? When 5,000 years ago, when we were bringing wolves into our family and domesticating them. And so this bark howl is definitive, right? They do it. I've seen some of these dogs. I've trained my dogs on the buttons, and you'll never be able to prove anything because you can't get inside a dog's head or a wolf's head. Like I can ask you, what did you mean by that, Joe? Right? But I saw this one dog combine the word cold with water. So there was a button for cold and there was a button for water and all sorts of other buttons. And this particular dog liked ice cubes. And the owner would give it ice cubes and it would crunch on these ice cubes. And finally, that dog started putting cold with water together as the way to say, I want an ice cube, right? And so there's many examples. They've got, tens of thousands of these buttons out there, and they're doing studies on them. I don't doubt that dogs and other animals can combine, short phrases together. I don't think they're going to write, Shakespearean plays anytime soon, or they're going to have a podcast like this. But we are missing the complexity in their communication. And Casey mentioned it earlier. This AI tech it's not like we didn't know how to do this in the past. We're just kind of reinvigorating what people have known in the past. Just go out and listen. Just sit there, shut up, and just go out in your backyard and pay attention to the chickadees, and you'll learn that there's a sharp-shinned hawk in the tree.
I think there's a more philosophical thing here. I think there's an element of we don't want to know these animals are more complex than they are, that we thought they were at some point. And I think there was a time not that long ago in science where anthropomorphizing anything was just a big no-no. And now through this technology and now through observation and just opening our mind up and saying, are these animals communicating in more complex ways than we ever thought before? Just that question alone is revealed that they are. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. And I'm glad the science is not afraid of it because it's a new frontier and we're learning so much about nature and communication. And I think it's just going to make our experiences in nature so much more valuable.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up anthropomorphizing because this game, the Dumb Marmot game, I'm done with questions, is called Wolfing Out. All right. I have collected some famous wolf quotes that are in English, and I want you guys to help me translate them back to their original wolfish. All right. So
Okay.
We'll start with the big bad wolf. After he has found fresh meat, you'll remember he says, little pig, let me in. So what would that sound like in wolfish?
I'll tell you, a wolf who wants to kill something is silent.
But I know there is a wolf cry for there's food here, right? Fresh kill, come and get it.
There's a raven call for fresh meat or food. Ravens will make a very high-pitched caw, and you can look around and go, oh, where's the carcass at? Wolves tend to go, silent if they're hunting. And if they're on a carcass, let's say they're on a carcass, the one sound I've heard them make the most of, there's two, and they're basically antonyms. One is a growl, and the other is a whine. And why would if you had, let's say 7 wolves around a carcass, why would one be whining and one growling? Because there's a dominant structure, and the one whining wants to get to the carcass. And the one growling's like, yeah, you're going to wait your turn here, right? You're not going to win. So those are the two ones you hear when the piglet's been ripped apart and being turned into bacon.
All right, fair enough. How about Wile E. Coyote? He doesn't really talk, but he does hold up signs. And one of the signs that he holds up is help with an exclamation point. Translate that to wolfish for me.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, from a coyote standpoint, I've heard this. It's a very high pitched yippy sound. Um, yeah, I can't even do it. I could have probably done it when I was 13. Um, but yeah, they howl and yip, 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 yip. Maybe you can jump in on the wolf side a little bit more when you hear something in distress.
Yeah, coyotes do a bark howl too. And I see them do bark howls when wolves are nearby. Coyotes aren't afraid to talk when wolves are nearby, nor are wolves afraid of them. But they'll do a bark howl or they'll do a higher pitched bark. They'll just bark. And that's an alarm, right? It's like, I see this, and you're probably notifying your other kin that there's a threat here. But they do the same bark howl that a wolf does, but at a higher pitch because they're smaller. Like here's a wolf skull, and here's a coyote skull. Okay. And the length of your vocal tract from your lips to your vocal cords creates a tube, and that tube resonates at certain frequencies that make the sound louder. And so coyotes have a smaller tube, and therefore they have a higher pitch. So you can tell a coyote from a wolf most of the time, and they can tell each other apart, but they will do that bark howl. And then, yeah, some people call it a yip yap. And it's sometimes hard. Like you'll hear coyotes out your back door and you'll be like, oh, there's 80 coyotes out there. And it's like 2.
Yeah.
And so they're really good at kind of like making those sounds in a way that it's hard for your brain to get through the cocktail party and figure out how many people are in the room.
And it sounds like that's by design. All right. How about we'll move on to the next one. This is Gamork from Neverending Story, the movie. He says, if you come any closer, I will rip you to shreds. He says it in English. What would it sound like in Wolfish?
I've heard this before on the coast of BC, some coastal wolves. It's very, I mean, it started off with a sharp warning bark. And it was, and it was like, that was letting everybody else know there's danger there. And then as we got closer, it was just a deep guttural growl. It was just, and there was no doubt what that meant to me and my crew. And we did exactly what we were supposed to, turn around and get the heck out of there.
This is not a sound you want to hear.
No.
All right.
It's pretty rare. Usually wolves, they don't like confrontation and then they'll run away. And we don't know exactly what was going on. Maybe we were too close to a den in the moment. But that wolf held its ground and gave us a growl. And there was no doubt what it meant.
Yeah, that's one you don't forget, I imagine, as you wet your pants. All right.
Yeah.
How about Michael J. Fox in Teen Wolf, as he's admiring himself in the mirror, he says, "You are an animal. Woo." And I think the woo is a howl. But what is that? You know, these get harder. I'm sorry, but there's a little bit of pride here, showing off.
I'll intro this a little bit and let Jeff jump in. But, we were talking back to that chorus howl, and I think that we're learning that other packs of wolves, when they're listening to a chorus howl, can they count? Do they hear the amount of wolves that are in that other pack? And then also, can they tell the fitness of that pack? So when a wolf howls, is it actually emulating its own fitness to other wolves to hear? And so I would think the teen wolf, he's looking at himself in the mirror thinking, I look great. He's gonna give out this kind of, fit howl. Is that accurate, Jeff?
Yeah. It's ironic that it's Michael J. Fox, right? Because he's small like me in stature, right? And I mentioned that the vocal tract length kind of determines how deep your voice is. And it's true that a bigger wolf has a bigger vocal tract, so it'll have a lower fundamental frequency with their pitch. And so if you were going to try to emulate a big bad wolf, you would try to lower your pitch as best you can. And that's how you would indicate that I'm a dominant wolf and you better watch out. And in chorus howls, you see kind of the dominant wolves do those howls. And yeah, for sure, like Casey said, the more of you participating in the chorus howl, the more the signal is to the competitive pack that you're a large pack. You can see it, right? You can see that there are large packs. And we've shown, Kira Cassidy's research has shown that when you have packs border one another, and when one pack, we've learned that one pack can estimate the number of wolves howling in a rival pack, and they make a decision. If they're outnumbered, they typically run out of the area. If they're not outnumbered, they typically approach that rival pack. So as a group, if you're going to do your political rally, it's important that everybody joins in so that the other party knows that you're bigger.
Got it. Okay. It's a show of force. Interesting factoid that occurred to me while I was writing that Teen Wolf one is the fact that Michael J. Fox's girlfriend is named Boof in that movie. And then in Back to the Future, he goes up against Biff.
Biff, right.
It's a weird thing that they have such odd names that are similar. All right, last one. This one's a little silly. Wolf Blitzer, famous quote, "I eat right, I exercise, I run 5 miles a day on the treadmill." I don't know how in the world you would translate that to wolfish, but I'll be impressed if you can pull this off, guys.
I mean, it comes back to that. I think if you're eating right, running on that treadmill and doing all those things, that tube that Jeff keeps talking about from the nose to the back of the vocal cords is going to get longer and stronger. So it's going to be the deepest howl that you'll ever hear on CNN.
Yeah. For me, it is the tough. I mean, you're kind of describing toughness, right? In that quote. And to me, the toughest people I've ever met don't say hardly anything at all.
That's so true.
If you've ever looked at a wolf where you've been lucky enough to be close enough or in like a rescue center, and you've looked at a wolf in the eyes, which you generally don't do, right? You look away. If you've ever seen them stare, you see like the epitome of wild and toughness. And I think that's why we're so like silly afraid of them. Is there's this deep admiration for the wolf, and yet they are one animal that can cause us havoc. And so we have all these silly political fights over them. But I think
it's understandable why we find them fascinating and why so many people want to come to our area of the country to see the wolves. And I think it makes all the sense in the world that we need to preserve their legacy and the wolves themselves so that people have that opportunity.
100%. I mean, I think one thing that's clear is that we can have wolves on the landscape and live the Montana way of life that we all want to live in all facets. You know, my grandpa was a cattle rancher, and wolves and grizzly bears in the backyard were a trophy to him at some level. I mean, he hung his hat on it. He was like, I'm a cattle rancher in grizzly bear country. I'm a cattle rancher in wolf country. There's other places that don't have either of those. There's plenty of grass for cows. And I think it should be a pride for all Montanans. And we can figure out ways that we can all live with them.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining me and participating in wolfing out this very dumb game. But this has been a fascinating conversation. Please be on the lookout for the Cry Wolf Project and Endless Venture, and go to the Montana Grizzly Encounter as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Joe.